Your pediatrician is going to give you all of the best advice that they can, but if you don't agree with it or it doesn't feel right, you're always allowed to get a second opinion. You're always allowed to go and talk with a therapist. A therapist is not going to be like, no, your doctor said this, so you don't need to come in. No, we're always going to be willing to come with our own perspective on it. And I think one of the biggest things to tell parents is if you feel something's wrong and it's not working for you, then you're right.
Ever feel like you suck at this job? Motherhood, I mean. Have too much anxiety and not enough patience? Too much yelling, not enough play? There's no manual, no village, no guarantees. The stakes are high. We want so badly to get it right. But this is survival mode. We're just trying to make it to bedtime. So if you're full of mom guilt, your temper scares you, you feel like you're screwing everything up, and you're afraid to admit any of those things out loud, this podcast is for you. This is Failing Motherhood. I'm Danielle Bettman, and each week we'll chat with a mom ready to be real, sharing her insecurities, her fears, her failures, and her wins. We do not have it all figured out. That's not the goal. The goal is to remind you, you are the mom your kids need. They need what you have, you are good enough, and you're not alone. I hope you pop in earbuds, somehow sneak away, and get ready to hear some hope from the trenches. You belong here, friend. We're so glad you're here. Hey, it's Danielle. You guys, I should be charging for this episode. It is that good. Welcome to our Failing Fatherhood series. Today's episode is with Ryan Allen. He is a licensed counselor and therapist in Ohio and Georgia, currently residing in Atlanta with his wife and two sons. They are 3 years and 3 months. He has a decade of expertise working with young children and their families. He combines a ton of professional knowledge with insights from his own journey as a father to guide families to shift away from traditional punitive approaches toward environments of mutual respect and learning and healthy relationships. He creates free resources for nearly 1 million parents and child caregivers on TikTok and Instagram. And I think super highly of him. He is so legit and really respect him as a peer. Right off the bat in this episode, he shares how parenting has humbled him even as a professional, how the parenting dynamic between his wife and him has been challenging as their expertise and perspective differs from each other, he as a therapist and she as a pediatrician. He shares how he's made the move from being trained in behaviorism to moving to a more attachment and connection relationship-based approach. And I completely geek out on this episode, no lies. I intentionally bring up several controversial topics to get his thoughts. And I'm going to guess that we are going to challenge some of your deeply held beliefs on this one. So brace yourself. We essentially play a game of, is it true? Is it true that therapists are perfect parents? Is it true that pediatricians' advice is gold? Is it true that kids grow out of behaviors? Is it true that you shouldn't say good job? Is it true that you have to read to your kids every night? Is it true that all it takes to make a behavior go away is playing your cards right? Is there such a thing as a naughty or bad kid? If your child knows better and does it anyway, isn't that manipulation? Shouldn't you take it personally? Do you need to fix a behavior right away or else it will get worse? All of these are questions that we dive into at length, and I'm telling you, so much insight you're going to take from this episode. And you have to stay to the end because we just keep rolling that ball of momentum and we get to the best topic, I think, of all, which is his thoughts on the behavior that we interpret and feel is disrespectful. If that is a trigger for you, if you often feel disrespected in your house, his advice is going to change everything. So I can't wait. Here is my conversation with Ryan. Welcome to Failing Motherhood. My name is Danielle Bettman, and on today's episode, I am joined by Ryan Allen. Thanks for being here, Ryan. I have followed you for years, and I'm just thrilled to kind of get to meet you as in person as it gets these days. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to be here.
This is great. I know that I already align with your work in so many ways because every piece of content of yours that comes across my feeds, I'm always like, yes, repost, share, like, because it's just legit advice. And I'm excited to be able to kind of bring you in front of my audience and get to kind of peek behind the scenes a little bit. So just go ahead and give a quick intro for those that aren't familiar with you. Who are you and who's in your family?
Sure. So I am Ryan. I am a licensed counselor in Ohio and Georgia, where I mostly work with young kids, like 2 to 5 year olds are my specialty. And then as at home, I am a dad to two sons. I have a 3 year old and an almost 3 month old at this point, and then my wife.
Perfect. Okay. And you are really big, as big with quotations as it gets on TikTok and Instagram. How long have you been on those platforms?
I started with, I think everybody who started on TikTok was when the pandemic hit. So
Sure.
I started then, and now I have to, so what, 4 years now, I think?
Yes. Yeah. We
Oh,
just had the 4-year anniversary.
my goodness.
Do we celebrate? I don't know.
Yeah, tentative.
Right. Right.
Definitely.
No, it's been a blur. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
No, that's great. And so you said that you came into parenthood with a bit of a cheat code. Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
Yeah, so before I became a parent, I had already been a therapist for, I think, 10 years at that point, which just like being a therapist, you're required to do a lot of work, having to look at why your beliefs are the way they are. And you kind of have to do therapy in order to be a therapist effectively. So I have had to do a lot of self work and have just learned a lot of stuff. So I just read books, the parenting books and the research and all of that. So I just came into it as a late parent because I didn't become a parent until I was 34, 35. So I just like had a lot of information coming into it.
Mm-hmm. So would you say every therapist is a perfect parent?
Oh, absolutely not. No, far from it. I think the flavor of being a child therapist probably helped me a little bit, but nobody is exempt from messing up your kids in some way, and therapists included. I also lose my temper sometimes, and I also get frustrated. We just moved this weekend, and
Oh boy.
I can't say that, with a 3 month old and a 3 year old that I was at my 100% best that entire weekend. So no.
Okay, and I'm not saying that to call you out, but on Failing Motherhood, we make an effort to really humanize our guests because it can be so easy to put people on a pedestal and assume that they have it all together. And, especially as a therapist, I'm sure that the impression of your followers is that you have a hack and an answer for every parenting situation under the sun. So, Ryan is the perfect dad, is what the assumption would be. And what we like to know is that, yeah, perfection in parenting is not even attainable, let alone we all have struggles. So tell us a little bit more about kind of what your parenting journey has looked like, if there were any kind of, things you had to overcome.
One, I think I love that you're focusing on that because social media has so many benefits to parenting because of the fact that you just have access to more information than we ever have.
Which is great.
At the same time, social media is all about the best picture. So I'm really glad that you're focusing on the whole picture rather than just the best stuff. As far as my own kind of like hangups and struggles that I've had, I think I was raised more in like authoritarian kind of styles with also kind of like some of the heavy punishment, kind of like threatening kind of stuff, as well as some of the guilt kind of strategies, right? And me going into college, probably carried a lot of those beliefs with me. And it took me getting into therapy school before I really started doing the work and then starting to work with kids and families. And then I was able to really start kind of breaking these things down and really just change my entire perspective. becoming a parent, again, I kind of came into it already knowing a lot of the stuff that I was already planning on doing. I knew that I was going to focus on attachment and connection and relationship. That was just my focus. So I didn't put our 3-year-old down for probably a year. I sat on a couch and I held him, and I probably gained 20 pounds. With also the pandemic was there too.
Minor detail. Yeah.
Exactly right. And that worked really well. I think now is probably when I'm having more of the struggles, and that's because we've now introduced a 3-month-old. It just changes the game, having to be pulled in multiple directions and having to kind of be even more aware of yourself and your frustration tolerance levels. And we're tired, so it's definitely more of a struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, parenting will humble you in ways that you did not anticipate, even if you're a professional. And I think especially if you're a professional in some ways, because I end up working with a lot of clients that are in medical professions. Maybe they are counselors in some other facet, or they're teachers in the education field. And, it somehow came naturally to work with other people's kids. And then all of a sudden you have your own, and it's like an entirely different dynamic and flavor. So have you experienced that dynamic now being on both sides?
I have. I've worked with parents from all different backgrounds. My current practice is more like private practice, mental health, no insurance. But I started in like community mental health. So I've kind of worked with the whole range of everybody. And that includes therapists and doctors and everybody in between. So yes. And then also my wife is a pediatrician, and then I'm a therapist. So we also get to look at our own different kind of viewpoints and perspectives in parenting. And that has been its own kind of challenge.
Ooh, tell us more about that. Because I feel like every parenting partnership and couple has yin and yang and, differing opinions and perspectives because of how they were raised or just what that behavior means to them, how they're interpreting things. And so everybody has to kind of reckon with that as they begin parenting in real time. What does that look like for you guys?
It has been messy at many points, we'll say. um, pediatricians and doctors, they tend to have a very behavioral kind of like teachings. They've very much focused on kind of rewards and punishments, and just that's kind of a lot of the suggestions you'll get whenever you talk with them, which I mean, it has its own place, but I also I'm much more focused and kind of tend towards that attachment and relationship kind of style. So, for example, when I said that I would hold our 3-year-old now, all the time, she would often try and be like, no, we got to teach him how to sleep on his own. We got to start focusing on that. Like, we need to sleep train now. And I'm like, you can't spoil a kid who's not 6 months old yet. You can't do it. You can hold them as much as you want. And it became like we would have many heated conversations where I'm like, I'm holding the baby. I'm not putting him down. And it ended up, after many conversations, I think she ended up kind of looking into it and saying, okay, well, one, he's not going to change on this one. But two, I think she was able to see some of the other people talking about how, yes, you cannot spoil a 6-month-old.
Yeah, which it sounds like coming in with differing expertise, there's definitely pros and cons to the strength of what you're both contributing. Because I think in a lot of parents, there might be a default that takes over of one parent becoming a little bit more of the intake researcher, expert-ish, where they're relaying the information and the other parent kind of takes in some of it and is like, all right, if you say so, we'll do it your way. Where there's a little bit of more give and take there. And that had to be a challenge for you both coming in no, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it was kind of like when it comes to medical stuff, you are the queen. I cannot argue with you whatsoever. I can have my little viewpoints, but you're always going to be able to be like, which one of us has the MD?
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, it's like, well, this side it's kind of my expertise. So we're still figuring it out. We've kind of gotten through the first kid. The second kid, we're doing much better with, which has been great.
It's that guinea pig syndrome of the first kid.
Exactly.
Yes. You don't know what you don't know yet until they're there going through it and you're throwing spaghetti at a wall in real time. And then in hindsight, some things make more sense.
Yeah, we had all the big conversations before we had the kids. We talked about religion and we talked about spanking and we talked about all that stuff, but there's just so many of the little things like how long you're going to hold the baby that you just don't know until you're in it, and then you have to have those conversations with, your tired, only partially functioning brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're all the world's best parents.
Oh, absolutely.
In our intentions before we ever tested on it.
Yes.
So are there any misconceptions for parents that, haven't done any type of therapy themselves or worked with a child therapist, psychiatrist, anything like that, and they only have a relationship with their pediatrician? How much education, background does a pediatrician have about children's mental health, children's emotional needs, attachment theory, that kind of stuff?
They have a lot. I think that the practice is moving forward in a lot of ways.
Good.
More and more pediatricians, I think, are starting to recognize the attachment and relationship stuff. I think it's understanding that there's a balance and both can exist to a degree. And so I think that's really good. As far as what parents can do and what they need to understand, one is that your pediatrician is going to give you all of the best advice that they can. But if you don't agree with it or it doesn't feel right, you're always allowed to get a second opinion. You're always allowed to go and talk with a therapist. A therapist is not going to be like, no, your doctor said this, so you don't need to come in. No, we're always going to be willing to come with our own perspective on it. And I think one of the biggest things to tell parents is if you feel something's wrong and it's not working for you, then you're right.
Yes. That parent gut. If it feels wrong, it probably is. Yeah. That I see in a lot of parents, they have insecurity overall. Right. And so, of course, that then it affects your parenting. It affects your ability to advocate for your child. It affects your permission that you feel or don't feel about going against what a certain expert in your world is recommending. And so a lot of what I've heard from parents is that they'll go asking for advice, bringing a certain behavior to their pediatrician, and then they are either told to ignore it, planned ignoring, or, they're really just not, it's kind of brushed off like, oh, it's developmentally appropriate. It's a phase, but then they're really struggling at home.
Yeah.
And there's just a huge gap there of like.
Absolutely. The one I hear often is they'll grow out of it, which can be true, but a lot of the research and what we're as a profession have to really work on is if a parent feels that something isn't right or is off, even if they're a first time parent, generally they're right.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen this world, but I was a teacher, preschool teacher, home visitor in elementary classes as well. And I really feel like before I was a parent, there is a lot of dismissal of parents in the profession, being on that side of things where it's very much like rolled eyes. Parents don't know what they're talking about. Parents are rolling in late. Parents, are not doing their job. Have you seen any of that? I don't know if that's in your world.
Absolutely. I used to work in a preschool. It's kind of where I got my start in the career. Is I was working in it was a mixed Head Start preschool, and it was probably my absolute favorite portion of my career. But I saw a lot of that, and I ended up going through trainings on how to be a mental health consultant because that entire profession is all about trying to bridge that gap and getting parents and teachers on the same page and working together. Because it's really easy to get into that adversarial kind of viewpoint, like, well, it's all their fault. And that's on both sides. Like the parent says, well, if the teacher's doing this and they're doing it wrong, and then the teacher's like, no, they're doing this. And the person who's caught in the middle of that is the kid who's just struggling and everybody's blaming.
Right. So to wrap up that topic, which I don't even know what I'm asking about exactly, but what do you feel like parents need to hear or be reminded of?
I think, again, it's knowing that you know your kid best and you are doing your absolute best. And the most important thing we can do is focus on what our kid is needing right now and what we can do to help them. And Generally, that's going to mean that we have to have a conversation with the teachers or a pediatrician, and we have to be that advocate for them. It's hard, especially when we have more than one kid or we're working 1, 2, 3 jobs. I understand that. At the same time, it's part of that gig.
Mm-hmm. And we give you permission.
Yes, you have permission.
Yes. And I feel like there is just so many other misconceptions that parents might come in with, just completely not knowing what recent research has said or how things are different than when they were parented, or just haven't really done a lot of work to reflect on how they were raised. And so kind of just whatever is the default coming out of their mouth is what was said to them. And so then you get into this world of parenting on social media, and you can easily be extremely overwhelmed with the amount of advice and conflicting information, and really feel, number one, like you're doing it all wrong. Whatever you're doing wrong for sure.
Yeah.
And number two, like you don't know what side is up, as in what is the most important, what's just like a bonus, what's like not even necessary. How can you kind of rate that ship for parents? Is there any type of like grounding we can offer?
Yeah, it's such a big thing. Yes, I think one, I'll give some suggestions and then we'll kind of go from there. So I think one is finding just maybe 1 or 2 accounts that you really trust and that you like, and just focus on that. When we start getting into too many accounts and we're hearing all this conflicting information, it has the effect of, one, that perfect parent effect where we're like, well, everybody's doing it right except for me.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it just creates more tendency towards that conflicting information. You'll hear a lot of things in the parenting social media circle, like you're not allowed to say good job or stuff like that, right? But I think you truly need to try and find somebody who is going to be able to kind of live in the gray world of all of that stuff, right? There's
Yes.
absolutely some like hard line things that I think we need to kind of stand by, like not hitting our children is one that I will kind of go to the grave on. But like the good job thing. Yeah, there was a study that kind of looked at that, and it said that overly using good job tends to, get kids just to kind of stay where they are rather than growing. But that doesn't mean you're never allowed to say good job ever again in your life, right?
Right.
So it's kind of taking that into perspective and being able to understand that sometimes, many times, it's a news article or news station has taken a research article and then they have kind of blown it up, and then everybody has gotten into that and they're like, well, now you're not allowed to do this. Reading books to your kids, really important, but we've also kind of over said how important that really is, right? It's great to read your books to your kids, and you should talk to your kids, and we can do it. But doing like saying that now I didn't read my book to my kid today, so now I'm a failure as a parent, like it just puts too much pressure on us. So I think that's probably the key thing, is knowing that things can be exaggerated. And that's why it's really important to be focusing on following people who are kind of like looking at the behind the scenes rather than just jumping onto the bandwagon. And then I would say that as far as yourself and your own growth as a parent, it's focusing on the thing that you need to focus on right now. I'm going to give an example that's not really parenting related. I'm like obligated to say it because I'm in it now. So I do CrossFit now. And a big part of CrossFit is being able to adapt the program to work for you, right? So if you go into it and you're like, I'm going to keep up with everybody, then you are going to get hurt. And that's why a lot of people end up getting hurt in that. And the same thing is true for parenting. If I'm like, I have to be the parent that is doing all this stuff that somebody on social media is doing, then I'm going to feel overwhelmed and I'm going to feel like a failure. And then I'm just going to give up and I'm going to fall back into this other stuff. Instead, focus on where you're at right now, and then just pick a couple things and just focus on that for a while and see how it goes and build from there.
I love that analogy, because yeah, we might not get injured trying to like pull the rope or flip the tire, but there is damage done. There's damage done to your mental health, your sanity, your confidence as a parent, and that trickles down into your relationship with your child. And 100% they feel that change in you, and that can almost be worse than just doing what you know and, running with that, because you're putting so much weight and so much pressure on yourself to do all the things and be better, and not even truly having a vision or a marker for what that is. And I love how you said that someone can live in the gray with you, because I feel like that is 100% what I do with my small group of clients. Is we just live in the gray and we like reckon with it. We like genuinely ask, well, what about this? And what about when? What if this happens? And well, I don't know how to do this. And do I have to do it? Just all of the questions that come up. And then the things, well, okay, but that's nice. But don't they need to learn eventually? Just all those questions that come up, because it's not black and white. If it was, we wouldn't have jobs, frankly. Like, it should be pretty
Yes.
clear cut. And it's not. It's nuanced. Humans are complicated. And I think that's what the beauty of the world of like going beyond punishments and rewards is. Like, that's so simplistic that if we truly just had to play the right card at the right moment, it really wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
And that's just not what we're doing. Like, that's
No.
not what's necessary.
Right. Yeah. Punishments and rewards are like they're the catch-all. It's the prescription. You just do this and then the thing's gone, but it never worked that way.
No, it never works that way. I wish, it would be great.
So much easier.
But
Yeah.
so much easier. Yeah. What types of comments do you see all the time from parents? Maybe questions or just kind of overall patterns or themes you see?
I think generally, so when I do lives or even on comments on videos, it's always asking about a very specific thing. And I'll say, like, every parent has their own specific thing that they're focusing on. And it's very valid, but I try to say that the way you address it is always the same. It's going to look different for each kid, but you have to look at it the same way, which is, why is my kid doing this? Like, what are the underlying things that are happening? And what do I need to teach them in order to help them be able to not do that thing anymore? And that kind of like logic there applies to whether the issue is hitting or biting, or they're not sleeping in their room, or they're having separation anxiety. It's like, I get the very specific, like my 5-year-old is having separation anxiety and they won't, like, I can't get them to get off of my leg when I go to school. And everybody that asks a question is something very specific like that. It's not that specific situation, but very specific. But again, it's okay. Well, why is your 5-year-old having trouble? Is this new? Is it something that they've been doing for, since they were 3, or they just start, right? Are there things that we can do to support them now as they're getting used to this? It's trying to figure out your specific kid's needs and then meeting that.
Mm-hmm. That summarizes so much, but yet that is not the default.
No.
That is not like the first thought that every parent is going to have is, I wonder why this is working for them. What are they getting out of this? Why is this not going away based on how I react? And that is like the last thought, I think. And that's what the beauty of working with someone that can be that step away to kind of be an unbiased party that just prompts these types of questions to get your mind down another route other than the one that you were on, which is only my child does this. This is personal to me because he doesn't do this for his dad. This must mean something about me as a parent, and I'm failing in some way. They must not like school. I mean, all of the other conclusions and assumptions you can jump to that aren't going to get you anywhere, frankly. Probably just more on a tailspin.
Yeah. What they're going to do is they're going to give you that quick fix. Like, I'm going to have to just I want to start punishing them. Like, oh, if you don't go to school, if you don't go in that classroom, then you're not going to have your tablet for the rest of the day. Or I'm going to do the exact opposite end of that. And I'm going to say, okay, if you go in there, then I'll let you have the tablet when you get done. Right. And sure, that might get you kind of compliance. They might do it in the moment. But the problem is that it's short lived. It ends up creating more problems, and it just doesn't solve the issue. At the same, like, when we focus on that punishment kind of mindset, it doesn't solve the core issue, and it just kind of sits there and festers, and then it turns into something else.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes from just a kind of, we went through, I grew up in the age of behaviorism. Like, I think the 80s and the 90s were like the golden age of behaviorism. And everybody was like you have Skinner and all those people coming out and saying everything is just punishment and rewards. It doesn't matter what's going on underneath. And we kind of bought into it because it's really easy, and it would be nice if that were true. And
Right.
it has just kind of carried with us to now. And now we have more information and more people coming out and being like, no, look, relationship matters. And there's all these underlying things that matter. And if you address these, then you don't need to worry about punishments and rewards, which actually aren't as effective as what they were promoted as being.
Mm-hmm. No, that's definitely what I learned in college. I remember coming up with almost like an ABA type intervention for these hypothetical situations, and, almost like doling things out like it was some sort of little formula. And, then bing, bang, boom, the behavior is gone and everybody's happy and we all go home.
Yeah, absolutely. It was right. And I did that with many parents. I can think of 6-7 years ago, even, where I'm teaching parents to ignore tantrums or ignore the bad behavior and then reward it. And we're setting up behavior charts and all that kind of stuff. And then you start to learn about, well, that's not working, or there's other ways that can get the same things to happen that actually don't damage the relationship. And they teach kids skills that are going to translate into other areas of their life.
Right, right. Here's the deal. If your child is sensitive and smart, yet loses it, is clingy, or aggressive with you at home, they can go 0 to 60 over the smallest things, like when they just don't get their way, nothing changes their mind, and they can't seem to get over it, and you know what you're doing isn't working, and siblings are starting to suffer. You could go to therapy yourself and take your child to therapy and follow all the experts and ask your family and friends for advice and take a course and set up a calm down corner and read all the parenting books and still feel defeated. It's time. It's time to learn the missing pieces of invaluable insight about their temperament that unlocks compassion in you and understanding of how to work with the way they're wired. It's time to communicate in new ways, like a hostage negotiator, to get through to them and cultivate cooperation with confidence. And it's time to eliminate the behaviors that are working to gain control and attention at their root, rather than playing whack-a-mole. Calm and Confident, the masterclass, is for you. There, you will master the kind and firm approach your strong-willed child needs without crushing their spirit or walking on eggshells. In this free training, I share the 4 critical kind and firm scripts that unlock cooperation in every situation, how to eliminate behaviors at their root, and the path to solidifying the open and honest relationship that you want to have with your child down the road. So go to parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident to access this exclusive on-demand training immediately. That's parentingwholeheartedly.com/confident. That link will be in the show notes. I would love to get your thoughts on a couple things. One is the idea of a kid being bad or naughty. What are your thoughts?
I don't think that any kid is really bad. I truly believe that all kids, they want to succeed and they want to do well and they want to really please their parents. Some kids struggle with that more, and it's not because they are bad, it's because something is going on that makes it harder for them. For example, if a kid has ADHD, their impulse control skills are just nil. They don't exist. And they're going to make a lot of decisions. And after the fact, they're going to be able to tell you, like, you say, why did you hit your brother? And they'll be like, I don't know. Are you supposed to hit your brother? No, they know they're not supposed to, but they did it anyway. So then we think, well, they're doing it on purpose, so they're a bad kid. And it's just not the case. It's because they're lacking a skill that they need in order to not do that thing. And it's our job to figure out what systems can we put in place to help them make the better decision in order to meet their real goal, which is pleasing and doing well and being happy. A lot of these kids end up saying things like, I'm a bad kid later on in life because they get punished so much, because they make these decisions and they know they shouldn't make these decisions. And then they get punished for making the decision. And they're like, well, I know I shouldn't do it. So why am I doing it? I must be a bad kid. And that just really kind of destroys their self-esteem.
Oh my gosh, yes. And I could have a whole podcast episode on that. just that vicious cycle alone. And I have like, there's an episode called Break the Cycle, and it's not like breaking the cycle generationally. It's like breaking that cycle of almost being a self-fulfilling prophecy of reaffirming to your kid who's afraid that they're a bad kid, that they are a bad kid based on our reactions. And then they're already really hard on themselves. They already beat themselves up and feel really bad because they know the rules. That's just not the intention. It's not malicious. It's not manipulation. It's not this like orchestrated plan to get revenge, from a 3-year-old, right?
Right, right. Oh, it seems like 2-year-olds. Like some people think that 18-month or 2-year-olds are doing this stuff intentionally. So, for example, you'll see this video show up on TikTok every now and then, and it's of a parent saying, "Well, if your kid bites, you should bite them back." And it's like it follows that same belief. Well, they're biting; they know they shouldn't bite, so you bite them back to show them how it feels. That way, they don't want to do it anymore. But it doesn't. It follows that same logic.
Mm-hmm. So was there anything that shifted? Because you said, even 6-7 years ago, that was something you were recommending. Is there anything that kind of shifted for you or was compelling enough to really open your eyes? Or what was that like for you?
Great question. So I think learning is kind of like this thing where you kind of hold on to your old stuff. It's like jumping onto a boat. You kind of keep your foot on the dock, and then you kind of wait it, like 1 foot on the boat and 1 foot on the dock for a little bit, and then finally you just kind of like take your foot off. And it was kind of like that for parenting for me, and for even my practice in mental health. My initial training was in cognitive behavioral therapy. I worked in criminal justice programs, like people with halfway houses and whatnot. And it was all about behaviorism. And it was all about your thoughts cause your feelings, cause your actions. And if we focus on the thoughts and we focus on like rewarding when you make good choices, it changes everything you do. And you kind of buy into that Kool-Aid because it makes sense and it sounds really simplistic. And they have all these statistics that say, hey, look, this stuff works. And you're like, okay, great. That's what we're going to do. And then you start kind of doing the same thing with parenting. It like parent management training and ABA and rewards and punishments and all that kind of stuff. And again, it's not that those things don't have their place ever. It's that it's taught as this is the only true golden way. And because of that, you're like, okay, well, we got to buy into that. For me, it was really starting to look and read people like Daniel Siegel, who every parent should read all of his and Tina Payne Bryson's books. They are just, everything they write is fantastic. And it lets you see that there is another way and that there are other kind of thought processes that go into this stuff. And then you can kind of see, like, read books like Punished by Reward, which talks about the double-edged swordness of rewards and how it can become its own punishment and how how these things aren't as effective. So it's kind of like the snowball effect, or eventually it just all kind of hit. And I was like, this isn't the way to do it. And then I started shifting and changing, and I started seeing good results with the parents I was working with too.
Yeah. No, kind of a similar approach from my side of things, because I didn't really have a parenting philosophy going into parenting myself. I just knew brain science. I knew classroom management. I knew some overarching principles. And I had about 2 and a 3-year-old when I started doing very simple kind of workshops and one-on-one, consultations with families and seeing what their questions were, what patterns arose of challenging behaviors, and very much developing things like one-off tools. But then eventually I found the Instagram world of, parenting experts and things, because I was on Instagram as a personal, attendee. And then that's when I realized, like, oh, this is so much bigger than even what I'm doing, and got kind of immersed in it. I ended up reading Janet Lansbury's No Bad Kids as one of my first parenting books, which was a fantastic nod in the right direction, because that was truly what I was seeing. Is I felt like in my own kids, I could give them the benefit of the doubt and see a lot more of like the lack of manipulation and intention in their behavior, and really just being so clear that it was either they're hangry or overtired, or, there's an explanation for their behavior that really wouldn't be changed at all with a punishment or a reward in place. And that's what really kind of sent me in the right direction. I ended up getting certified in positive discipline, which I love because its whole principle is like a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. They feel not enough. They feel like they don't belong. They feel like there's like a core thing missing, especially in that parent-child connection relationship. And that to me was like a lightning bolt when I've like found everything, because it just kind of like connected it all with like a better label than I could even explain it. But it was very progressive. It was very slow. It was very just like, right, taking one example, one family, one kid at a time, and taking notes and seeing what worked and, how to kind of explain things, which was completely different than from my teaching background. And which leads me to the next thing I wanted to pick your brain on, the clip charts, the red, yellow, green. That's like a staple in every preschool.
All right, let's talk about clip charts.
What are your thoughts? I know I'm throwing controversial things at your way.
Clip charts and the way that they're done in schools, generally, I don't agree with them because they are usually put up in front of the classroom and every kid can see who's on red and who's on green and who's on yellow. And then we get to see, so it's public shaming whenever the kid has to put theirs down on whatever other color. The problem is that the kids who are going to do very well, they're going to always be on green and you're not going to have any issues with them. So the chart does nothing for them. The kids who are always going to struggle are always going to be on yellow and red because that's what learning looks like. And all it does is kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy that you talked about earlier. It creates that I'm the bad kid. I'm always on red. And the other kids are like, yeah, he's always on red. And they talk about it. And I like kids come into my therapy office and they're like, yeah, this kid's on red. And they said they say this stuff and they know. And so it doesn't do anything to teach. It focuses again on that, hoping that the shaming of it will make them change their behavior, which, as we've kind of talked about, doesn't address the core underlying problem.
Right.
Kids with ADHD struggle with those because they're put on red and they can't necessarily control it. But also they struggle when with any kind of like negative feedback. It really hits them more intensely than what would be a neurotypical kid, right? Mm-hmm. So it ends up hitting them even harder. It really kind of even just further solidifies that I'm a bad kid belief. And then it creates the emotions, which then the teacher's like, it was just a red clip. And it just causes more problems than it ever should have. If you're a teacher and you're listening to this, if you are going to use charts, it needs to be between you and the child and between nobody else should know anything about it. And it needs to be on a very finite thing that you're going to be focusing on. And that is it. That is how you make them work. But again, the main focus should be on why is the kid struggling and what can we do to help them get better?
Yes. I so agree. I wasn't going to be surprised by your answer. I knew that. But I mean, they're still so universal.
They are.
There really just isn't a question against it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, theoretically, I get where teachers are coming from. And so many teachers, it's not like we're using this stuff because we just want to, punish kids. They're grasping at straws.
No ill intent. Right.
Especially like many teachers, they're not like taught a lot of this stuff. And they're like, this kid is acting out and they're like, I got to do something. So then it's all well-intentioned. It's the same thing when we were talking about pediatricians. It's all well-intentioned. We're just trying to help parents who are struggling and help a child who is struggling. And this is one tool that we can do that with. So we just kind of rely on it. But again, it's just, there's other things out there.
Mm-hmm. So that's a great segue into alternatives, because I don't want to, spend the whole episode bashing everything that's wrong about the world and then not provide anything helpful.
Okay, let's do it.
So alternatives. What are some of the main either pieces of advice or tools that are kind of the go-to low-hanging fruit that you provide most of your followers?
A key part of it is understanding that the majority of parenting is figuring out your own stuff. It's looking at you in these situations. We talk a lot, and I think you kind of mentioned it, is that HALT S stuff. Like, are they hungry? Are they anxious and stressed? Are they lonely? Are they tired? Are they sick? And we often focus that on the child, but we need to be focusing it on ourselves as well. If you start to become aware of where you're at emotionally, and you start doing the skills to manage that, you would be amazed at how that will change your relationship with your child and how your child will start using the exact same skills that you are. I'm a huge proponent that parenting really is what we do to take care of ourselves, and how we're modeling all this stuff rather than how am I getting my kid to do the right thing?
Yes, I say often that it's parenting because it's about the parent. It's not childing.
Yes, absolutely. And and that kind of like philosophy carries in so many ways. The same thing with those charts that focus on the red and yellow and green. That can be a really great strategy if we focus on emotional, like where they are emotionally. Mona Delahook in her book Beyond Behaviors talks about this a lot, where instead of using it as a way to say, hey, are you in red or are you in yellow or are you in blue? Instead, look at it as the parent looking at the child and saying, oh, are they in red or are they in yellow or are they in blue? And now, because I know that they're in blue, I know what I need to do in order to support them through that.
Yes, it's like being able to read them and then understand, okay, based on what I know, here's the approach that's going to be most effective for them in this level of dysregulation or in this headspace. And yes, we are the experts of our kids, but we can be even more experts of them when we figure out some of just that indicators of kind of what does that look like when my kids' eyes glaze over and it feels like they're possessed and it feels like they become like the Hulk version of themselves. That's interesting anecdotal evidence to take into account, right?
Yes.
And I do that a lot with my clients where I'm like, okay, let's put the picture together. And when you recognize, you first need to actually just like genuinely recognize and almost say out loud, okay, I am dealing with my child in this state. And sometimes I call it like their alter ego. You can almost like name the alter ego, a version of their name that's like a nickname to be like, oh, I'm not dealing with, Sammy. I'm dealing with like Samarita because this is,
Yeah.
next level. But it's to help you context switch between your expectations and checking in with yourself because it's like an undertow and the strength of their dysregulation can somehow like come for you if you're not grounded enough in being able to check in with your own needs at the same time.
Yes.
Do you agree? Like what else, what are your like terminology for some of those moments?
100%. I mean, you said it perfectly. It's so much of it is not what do we need to do to our kid in the moment. It's how we're responding to it. It's all about us as the parent and what we're trying to manage in that situation. Our kids are going to do things that frustrate us. That's just normal. It's what we're doing with that frustration and how we are modeling our kids to take care of it when we react. And that's when we make those decisions that we end up usually regretting. Like,
Yep.
usually even parents who spank, usually they do it and then they're like, I really don't want to do that. And they feel bad about it afterward. And it's because we're reacting. When we are able to kind of stop and realize that there's very few things in parenting with our kids that require an immediate reaction, it can really help us to slow things down and be able to manage things better. I think when when we were managing our firstborn, every time that we had a night where he wouldn't sleep, once we were actually like, consistently sleeping, I would get on Google and I'd be like, not sleeping. And there was always like, well, this is the 7-month sleep regression. Oh, no, this is the 8-month sleep regression. I'm like, okay, so every month is just a sleep regression.
Yeah.
Every single one. But my wife and I, we would look at each other and we'd be like, what are we going to do? He's never going to sleep again. What do we need to do to fix this? And I'm like, we don't necessarily need to do anything. We just need to let this happen and we need to be there for it and just kind of like live in it. And it doesn't have to become a thing until it's actually a thing.
But that's so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It feels much more empowering to feel like you're doing something about it and you're fixing it right away so that you can move on and it's painful, right?
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of that coping mechanism in parenting comes from, is just trying to like get yourself out of a jam that feels over encompassing and never ending. And yeah, you don't want to sit in a meltdown for 2 hours. Nobody does.
No. And you said it great. I love it's the uncomfortable. It's getting comfortable in that uncomfortable. There's that old saying in therapy. I'm going to try and remember it. What is it? Our job is to comfort the disrupted and disrupt the comfortable. But parenting is all about being uncomfortable and being okay with that uncomfortable and allowing your kids to kind of exist and be. My own son, he will kind of throw it at me sometimes. I've had moments where he's like been crying for 10, 20 minutes. And I'm like, dude, come on now. And he's like, he'll stop and he'll like stop crying, and I'll be like, okay, good. And then he'll be like, Daddy, I just want to cry. I'm like, okay, man, you cry. But
Who am I to argue with that, I
I'm
guess?
like, he knows what he needs to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, that was me. In that moment, I'm like, that was me being uncomfortable with, and frustrated and annoyed and wanting him to stop crying. And there was nothing wrong with him crying. Like, he's allowed to cry.
Yeah. It's like zooming out and looking at the whole premise, because you alluded to that carryover premise from the behaviorism, which is that like the moment right after a behavior occurs is like the most influential moment. That's when like all of this window of opportunity is, and you have this golden, window to respond, either pairing negative with negative or positive with positive, and you have to do it right then. And so we kind of have this like almost subconscious pressure to respond or react immediately. And truly, if you got to like just zoom out and realize that whole premise is really broken, that's just not true.
Yeah. There's so few things that we just have to like react to. And many times it's just kids being kids and exploring the world, right? Like, yes, is your kid going to try and blow bubbles with their milk with the straw? Yeah. Do we need to intervene with that? No. It's okay. They're allowed to make a little bit of messes.
Yes.
Right. But my instinct as a parent or as an adult is like, that's going to be a mess and I'm going to have to clean it up. And it's not just like, that's not how we drink milk. Right. So we need to make them stop it. But no, it's okay. They're exploring their world and it's fine.
Yes.
Yeah. So many things have been like that. With probably my biggest learning moment in parenting is so many times where I will set a limit and then he'll be like, but please, or I want to do this or whatever. And I stop and I'm like, okay, why am I really setting this limit? What is the reason behind it? And so many times it's like, there's really no reason to hold this boundary. None at all. It's just me wanting to get my own stuff in it. And he's fine.
Yeah. So it's okay to change your mind sometimes.
It is okay.
Yeah. Yeah. You have permission to do that too as a parent. Well, I'm having so much fun like nerding out on some of this stuff with you. I have one more question and then we'll kind of wrap up. And I want to be able to put some of those book links in the show notes. And I just feel like there's, so many great resources we've already thrown out there. My question is, especially if we are getting any dad listeners, one of the biggest triggers that I see as kind of a pattern is interpreting behavior as disrespectful. Do you have any thought on maybe why that can be one of the go-to thoughts and what it might be instead?
Yeah, I think we've kind of already talked a little bit about it. It's the same reason that we think kids are bad kids. We interpret what they're doing. We take it personal. I think many men have been raised in this kind of like alpha mindset world. And because of that, we think that respect is kind of like everything. And anything that kind of like chinks at that armor, we are like, they're disrespecting me and I have to react right now in order to make sure that they know that I'm the dominant male. And if I don't, then I'm the pushover and I can't be the man. And like, and all these underlying like men, just things that get like pushed in onto us, just start to take over. All that is our own survival instinct brain kind of taking over, trying to protect us. But if we really kind of sit there and think about it and look through it, you realize that it's not personal. It's just your kid being a kid, and you can show them how to manage that frustration in a way that will help them better solve and engage with people in the future. So yes, you can feel disrespected and you can yell and you can try and like put them in their place. But you could also take that and be like, wow, I am feeling really disrespected right now. And then set a healthy boundary with it. I'm not going to allow you to hit me. You can't hit me. It's not okay. Right. We can set healthy boundaries and we can teach kids at the same time.
Right. It's not one end of the pendulum only. Right. Like either I just exert all this dominance or I let them walk all over me and we have no rules.
Yeah. And so many, I think, and I've seen this. I had a live a couple weeks ago where a dad was worried that their child was sensitive and they wanted to like, how can I make them less sensitive? What do I need to do? Because I'm worried they're going to be I'm just sensitive in the world and the world's not a safe place and I need to make them hard. And that's the mindset that so many men have been brought up in. This, you're not allowed to cry, you have to be tough and all that kind of stuff. But truly, there are going to be like men as well as women. There's a whole spectrum of their personality and their being. And some are going to be more sensitive and some are less so. And neither one of those is right or wrong. It's allowing them to be who they are. And in that same breath, you don't teach people to be hard by being hard to them. I was reading, I can't remember the book I'm reading, but they gave this great analogy. It's like if you're teaching your kid how to play soccer, like when they're 3 years old, you get them out on the soccer field and you're like walking around on the soccer field with them and you're like showing them where to go and you're helping kind of like guide them to and fro. And then the next year you're like kind of like there, but maybe you can take a step back. And then the same thing happens. And then by the time they're in high school or well before that, I would imagine, they're out there on their own and you're just kind of sitting back and watching. And our emotions and being able to deal with difficult situations is the exact same.
Right. There's a progression of skill building
Mm-hmm.
where they'll be able to kind of scaffold their way up. And we have to start small, start supportive, start like where their level is, and then build from there. And yeah, that's universal with so many things, whether that's emotional skills, physical skills, potty training. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole gamut. Yeah. So the way that you teach them to ride a bike is the way that you kind of teach them to deal with maybe negative feedback from a friend or things like that, where
Exactly.
they just don't know what they don't know, and they really need someone who they feel like is able to hear them out and be on their team. And when you can provide that, that's the foundation for so much more skills.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, again, it's focusing on that men and that dad kind of mentality. It's understanding that there's no one type of quote unquote man out there. And every man is valid in who they are in that moment. And I think many of these men were probably made to feel less than because they did show some emotion. And now that is them reacting to that. So they see their own kid being sensitive or showing some emotions and they're like, I'm not allowed to do that. And then they react, right?
Yeah.
And then after you react, you start to kind of justify it in your brain. You're like, well, I'm trying to do it because of this. So you start to create that own kind of, again, self-fulfilling prophecy. We're using that a lot today. But truly stop and take a minute and really look at where that is coming from. Take like that honest viewpoint of it. And I think you'll see that it's not really that you necessarily believe it or agree with it, but you can see that it's coming from maybe your own childhood or your own, like the people you're hanging out with, or even society's views of what men are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. You can just challenge it a little bit. And it's like hitting it in one spot and then all of a sudden it starts to shatter. And okay, maybe not. Well, this has been so much fun. Remind listeners how they can connect with you after listening to this episode.
Absolutely. So as long as TikTok is still around, I'm there. So that is preschool therapy. And then my Instagram is preschool therapist. And I have a website, the same, it's just preschooltherapist.com.
Okay. That'll be all linked in the show notes so they can click from there. And then the last question I ask every guest that I have on is, how are you the parent your kids need?
And you told me you were going to ask this question at the beginning, and I'm like, I've been like thinking about it, and I think every parent is the parent that their kid needs them to be. It's truly, and I didn't get to say this, and I wanted to, but a lot of it is just being a good enough parent. It's being 30% is what you're really aiming for. You don't have to aim for 100%. It's 30%. And I feel like that's where I am. My kid, well, we met all the basic needs. So fed, watered, clothed, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Emotionally, I am supportive of him and I'm trying to break down some of those toxic masculinity things and help him be able to kind of continue that cycle breaking mentality by raising him differently.
Yep. Exactly what he needs. And they're both lucky to have you.
Thank you.
And we're lucky to have you here. Thank you for so much insight and wisdom and just getting into these things with me. We so appreciate your first-person perspective and just being so relatable and honest. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
Absolutely. It was so fun. I can't believe an hour went by just like that.
Right? It was so fast.
Right.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Failing Motherhood. Your kids are so lucky to have you. If you loved this episode, take a screenshot right now and share it in your Instagram stories and tag me. If you're loving the podcast, be sure that you've subscribed and leave a review so we can help more moms know that they are not alone if they feel like they're failing motherhood on a daily basis. And if you're ready to transform your relationship with your strong-willed child and invest in the support you need to make it happen, schedule your free consultation using the link in the show notes. I can't wait to meet you. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. I believe in you, and I'm cheering you on.